Hi there. My name is Mary, and I'm the Director of Youth Services at the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And I'm here today to finish reading Some Writer, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. This book was published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt in 2016. And as I've mentioned before, this is a wonderful book to pick up when the libraries open again, because it's filled with a lot of illustrations and photographs, which I really would have a hard time sharing with you this way. But here we are to complete the book. Chapter 13. Sentences we hated to come to the end of. All that I hope to say in books, all that I ever hope to say, is that I love the world. I guess you can find that in there if you dig around. E.B. White died on October 1st, 1985, at the age of 86. He left instructions for his home to be sold. He did not want his farm turned into a museum. Ever since his childhood vow to never go up on a stage again, Andy had avoided public and private events, town meetings, weddings, graduations. So, at his memorial service, Roger Angell reminded the congregation, if Andy White could be with us today, he would not be with us today. His obituary in the New Yorker read in part, White had abundantly that most precious and least learnable of writerly gifts, the gift of inspiring affection in the reader. Whether he was working on a poem, a cartoon caption, an essay, or a children's book, E.B. White felt it was a writer's obligation to transmit as best he can his love of life, his appreciation for the world. His friend and editor, William Shawn, said, even though White lived much of his life on a farm in Maine, remote from the clatter of publicity and celebrity, fame overtook him, fortunately leaving him untouched. His connections with nature were intimate and ardent. He loved his farm animals, his neighbors, his family, and words. E.B. White never believed that writers were celebrities. He wrote that when he was a child, an author was a mythical being. The book was the thing, not the man behind the book. He did not seek literary approval and never considered himself a great reader. He preferred reading farm journals and boating magazines. Much of what he wrote was not for children, yet many consider Charlotte's Web not only White's magnum opus, but one of the best children's books ever written. Did E.B. White ever wish he'd written a masterpiece for adults. His stepson, Roger Angel, said the thought would not have occurred to him. Andy once said, "Anyone who writes down to children is simply wasting his time. You have to write up, not down. Children are demanding. They're the most attentive, curious, eager, observant, sensitive, quick, and generally congenial readers on earth. Children are game for anything. I throw them hard words, and they backhand them over the net." In his essays, White wrote about the environment, racism, world government, and other complex topics with a keen wit. He maintained he wrote by ear for an audience of one. And in reviewing essays of E.B. White, Ben DeMott describes the sound of his words as music. The man knows all the tunes, all the limited, lovely music that a plain English sentence can play. John Updike, who worked with Andy at the New Yorker, Catherine White was his editor, remembered how much more fun Andy seemed to have than the rest of the younger staff. Not loud or obvious fun, but contained, interning fun. But there were a few critics along the way, and not just young readers wanting to know whether Stuart Little ever found Margalo. "I don't like the way it ends. It makes me sad," one young reader wrote. Criticism came in 1947 from the New York Herald Tribune during the McCarthy era, when E.B. White fiercely opposed the blacklisting of Americans who refused to answer questions about their loyalty or political beliefs. White shot back to the newspaper editors. "I am a member of a party of one. I hold it that it would be improper for any committee or any employer to examine my conscience. It is not a crime to believe anything at all in America." White believed profoundly in freedom. To be free, in a planetary sense, is to feel you belong to the earth. To be free, in a social sense, is to feel at home in a democratic framework. And to be free as a writer meant he was able to write as he pleased, to get down on paper a little capsule of truth. That truth came out in simple, clear sentences. Writing that William Shawn described as utterly beautiful. He was ageless, and his writing was timeless. Sailors have an expression about the weather. They say, "The weather is a great bluffer." I guess the same is true of our human society. Things can look dark, then a break shows in the clouds, and all is changed. sometimes rather suddenly. It's quite obvious that the human race has made a queer mess of life on this planet. But as a people, we probably harbor seeds of goodness that have lain for a long time, waiting to sprout when the conditions are right. Man's curiosity, his relentlessness, his inventiveness, his ingenuity have led him into deep trouble. We can only hope that these same traits will enable him to claw his way out. Hang on to your hat. Hang on to your hope. And wind the clock, for tomorrow is another day. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1973. Author's note. It has been ambitious and plucky of me to attempt to describe what is indescribable. But a writer, like an acrobat, must occasionally try a stunt that is too much for him. No one could have prepared me for the sheer joy of diving into E.B. White's oeuvre. In reading his children's books, essays, and letters, I felt, as White wrote about his time in Maine, as a child sees, feels, and listens. When I read his introduction to a basic chicken guide for the small flock owner, I gained a specific insight as to how to approach the book I was trying to create. White writes that he had been devoted to hens since 1907, and how as a boy he felt the miracle of incubation and awe at an egg pipped from within after 21 days. He offers practical guidelines for would-be chicken owners. Be tidy, be brave, walk, don't run. And though his words pertain to chickens, I found them to be sound advice while writing this book. There are moments and days of discouragement. There are other moments and days which are richly rewarding and exhilarating. In Maine, much of the landscape, as E.B. White knew it, is still there, arrested in time. Canoes skim across lakes. Sailboats cruise into harbors. Long blue shadows appear on winter afternoons. All the minuscule details are here too. Moxie soda and tiny birch bark. Canoes are still for sale. A cavatica can still be found in barn doorways. For years, readers have wished they could see where E.B. White lived, to follow his footsteps in the dung and the dark of the barn. But he would discourage it. There's a saying in Maine, you can't get there from here. His granddaughter, Martha White, suggests that to get to know her grandfather, to find his boundless and gallant capacity for wonder, take a ride on a train, visit Belgrade Lakes, or sail or paddle in a boat of any size. Even better, read anything he wrote. It's all there if you dig around. Salutations, Melissa Sweet. About the art. I set out to capture two things as I began the art for this book. The sense of place in White's writing and the small, vivid details he describes. In researching this book, I visited Cornell University and saw the landscape of Ithaca. I traveled to New York City and to Maine's Belgrade Lakes and Blue Hill Peninsula, drawing and photographing along the way. White's barn and the bits and pieces one might find in a barn in Maine inspired my materials. Snippets of wood, baling wire, screws and nails and fastenings. A box of vintage office supplies, old paper clips, labels, and cellophane tape, which I imagined were akin to what might have been in stock at the New Yorker offices. Along with pieces of old books, handmade papers, watercolors, pencils, and a manual typewriter to type White's quotes, provided a rich toolbox. Finally, because eggs, in all their guises, occur so often in his writing, in forwards, essays, and Charlotte's Web, of course. The front end papers are a collage of White's writings about eggs. And both the back and front end papers depict real goose eggs that were laid during the spring I began the art. As E.B. White wrote, all beginnings are wonderful. And I will give you a peek at the end papers. Now we have an Afterword by Martha White. When Melissa approached me to say she had decided to write and illustrate a children's biography of E.B. White, I didn't hesitate to give her the White family's nod of approval. I knew her work from when my children were small, and I had always found it imaginative, quirky, and fun. Plus, it was full of dogs. I'd just finished editing a collection of my grandfather's writings about his various canine companions, E.B. White on dogs. So that detail was important. That she and I are neighbors made it even more convenient. And we quickly fell into the habit of sharing photos and stories. Before long, Melissa showed up with a goose egg for me. Its innards carefully blown out, and the shell beautifully adorned with a delicate copper wire and an E.B. White quotation on an illustrated tag. I am sending you what I think is one of the most beautiful and miraculous things in the world. N.A. It was from a letter he had written to some 6th graders in Los Angeles in 1973. That egg was from one of his geese, Felicity, and he was sending it across the country as a thank you for some essays the class had written. Melissa's egg was from another Maine farm, and it was an early signal that she was on the right track in her research on E.B. White. I knew Melissa primarily as an illustrator, but I was familiar with some of the books she'd written herself as well. Children's books are even harder to write than other books, in my opinion, because children are very demanding about the sentences that draw their attention. There wasn't a needless word, as William Strunk, Jr. would have called it, in any of her books. But the clincher was that Melissa and the author, Jen Bryant, had just launched The Right Word, Roget and His Thesaurus. Peter Mark Roget was a man, like my grandfather, who cared deeply about choosing exactly the right word. When I saw that book and how Melissa had chosen to illustrate Roget's word list, I knew she had spent many months living inside of a thesaurus and inside the mind of the man and boy who first created it. I own an old thesaurus, Roget's International Thesaurus from 1944, one of many books that migrated from my grandfather's bookshelves to mine. It is sun-bleached and tattered, dog-eared from use, and its spine is falling apart. I wouldn't replace it for the world. Like a favorite cookbook, it has been endlessly useful, lived in, and well loved. And it remains within easy reach. My grandfather once wrote about letters. The visitor to the attic knows the risk he runs when he lifts a lid from a box of old letters. Words out of the past have the power to detain. Hours later, he may find himself still crouched on the floor, savoring the pains and embarrassment of an early love, and with leg cramps to boot. Forward, July 30, 1932, points of my compass. It is the same with a thesaurus. You can get lost in it, and I'm sure my grandfather often did. Melissa Sweet could have had no better training. The first time I toured Melissa's studio in Rockport, I had one of those rare moments of imagining a path not taken. Wouldn't it be fun to be Melissa Sweet? Her studio exudes creativity, curiosity, color, and light. The ground floor is well organized, like a library or archivist's office, and you want to open every drawer and peek inside. The upstairs is where the paint pots come out, and ink might get spilled. But the effect is not messy or scattered. It is immediately clear that this is a place where a great talent is not just at work, but at play. Like my grandfather, Melissa Sweet has somehow kept that childlike sense of wonder at the world, and thankfully found an avenue to share it with the rest of us. She is an observer, sometimes a collector, and she seems to work from a place of gratitude for the natural beauty that surrounds us, maybe especially here on the coast of Maine. In her author's note, Melissa mentions a poultry primer and the introduction my grandfather had written. With his pithy advice, be tidy, be brave. That book had passed from his bookshelves to mine when I started to keep a small flock of my own. He also advised, don't try to convey your enthusiasm for chickens to anyone else. That remains true about chickens, but I suspect it's not the case when it comes to favorite children's books, or their writers, or illustrators. I hereby convey to you my unbridled enthusiasm for Melissa Sweet, and assuming you have chosen to read this Johnny-come-lately Afterword, I offer you the White Literary LLC seal of approval on this sweet biography. Consider it authorized, because Melissa is clearly not just its author, but an accurate authority on my grandfather. When Scott Elledge completed his book, E.B. White, A Biography, my grandfather sent him a thank you note that ended with the lines, I know how hard it is to write about a fellow who spends most of his time crouched over a typewriter. That was my fate, too. Melissa Sweet has faced the same challenge, plus that of translating his many years and extensive works into a children's biography. Through her great skill, care, and talent, she has brought it to life with color and humor and playfulness. Here in these pages, you will find the grandfather I remember so well. The man with a dachshund on his desk and his hands on a manual typewriter. Now, thanks to Melissa Sweet, you can know him too. Martha White, White Literary LLC. And thank you so much for tuning in and listening to Some Writer, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. The back of the book has a timeline and more illustrations, and there is notes for you to peruse as well, and a selected bibliography of works by E.B. White and works by others. So, as I said, this is a book that when the library's open, you'll want to come in and find, just to peruse the illustrations the back matter, the photographs, the facsimiles of manuscripts. This is just a treasure of a book. And in this, the 200th birthday of the state of Maine, it's only right that we be reading a book about a Maine author, E.B. White, written by a Maine author, illustrator, Melissa Sweet. And I hope you've enjoyed this story, and come back on Monday when Sarah Murray will be starting a new story for you to enjoy. So, until next time, bye-bye.